My name is David Klamen, and I'm a painter. And generally, I work with oil paint, but over the years, I've experimented with acrylics and watercolors and other pigments. I always made art in some form or another. Even as a child, I was always obsessed with things visual. And when I went to study at the University of Illinois, I studied both art and philosophy and science. And when it came time to go to graduate school, I was offered a full ride to the School of the Art Institute, which was a great opportunity and made sense for me to move into that direction. And as a student, I began showing professionally, and things started to move ahead in my career at a fast pace. And so I found a very smooth transition into making a career out of really what I've been doing all along. It just seemed like a natural development of me following my interests. The primary ideas that my work deals with revolve around a long-standing practice of exploring different visual answers to the question, how do we know what we know? It's a kind of visual epistemology. Over the last 10 or 15 years, I've taken different strategies to answer that question. Things like empiricism, that we know the world through direct sensory input, or taxonomy, or introspection, or memory, or at times even Eastern methods such as daimoku, which says that we can gain wisdom enlightenment through repetitious chanting. And I've made paintings that explore them to see what I could learn from them, what kind of veracity they had, what they could offer as a metaphor. At times, I've taken these different ideas and I've made paintings that have overlapped them to take two seemingly incompatible ways of understanding the world and put them together into one painting. As a result of that, many of my exhibitions have looked a lot like group shows, because while they're bound together by a common and expanding idea, they visually explore it through different avenues. One of the paintings of paintings, meta-paintings is what I refer to them as, is a painting of a Mondrian painting tipped in an oblique angle. For example, Mondrian's work is very forceful in being abstract and two-dimensional, and it also relies on the aesthetic experience that is embodied in the part-to-whole relationships of the painting, and it also is concerned with the horizontal and vertical dimensions primarily. But when I make a painting of it at an oblique angle, while in one sense it reverently admires Mondrian, in another sense it kind of playfully contradicts him in that now the angles have become diagonals, and the part-to-whole relationships within the bounds of his frame are echoed by the name tag that I painted, and again by the rectangle of my painting. And it's a forcefully illusionistic painting which contradicts the abstractness of Mondrian. The larger multi-canvas meta-painting installation grew out of making small paintings that explored ideas that were faster and perhaps more subtle, and building them up as each an individual experience of this painting, of a painting, and the kind of peculiarity that happens when the picture plane gets overlapped, where in one sense it goes at an angle, in another sense it records my touch right on the surface of the canvas. And I found that as I built up a number of these, if I would orchestrate them together into a larger multi-canvas installation, it became a kind of library of these experiences, where there's an intertextual play where they all kind of ricochet off of each other, and also from a distance they become a little bit like a large, almost cubistic kind of short relief of space. And so they become almost like two different works. From a distance, this large fragmented piece, and then up close, each one has their own little surprises of the representation of an individual artist. In the other groups, in particular the two pieces that I refer to as remixes here, where I've taken a painting of someone else's painting, a Monet and a Picasso in this case, and I've fused them with a series of undulating waves. Part of the inspiration of that was to sort of playfully mix them in a way that the musician might appropriate music from another source and remix it. So while these works have some of the respectful tradition, at the same time they have a funky, heavy, rhythmic playfulness to them that both contradicts that and complicates it in a way that I think adds some visual entertainment. I would think that technology has influenced not only the way I make these works, but it's also influenced the atmosphere in which we're processing and thinking of images to begin with. And as technology has made imagery become increasingly digitized and we're awash in images almost all the time, I think it also has highlighted by contrast a certain character that is inherent in hand-painted imagery. When I paint an image of painting, on many of them I'm copying their brushstrokes, brushstroke for brushstroke, and it offers a physical record of my touch on their picture plane, which is tilted in space in an oblique angle, where in one sense I'm mimicking their actual physical touch on the surface of a painting, but in another sense it's foreshortened in linear perspective. So there's this peculiarity of this brushstroke which both imitates their touch, but at the same time imitates what their touch would be had it existed at a slight angle going back in space. And so the physicality of it, the fact that it both is an image of an image, but at the same time is a direct indexical record of my touch, I think is increasingly interesting in a time and place when digital images surround us.
My name is Joseph Hart, and I'm a painter and a works on paper guy, primarily oil on canvas as well as just about anything I can get my hands on to put on paper. Acrylic, oil, enamel, graphite, collage, paper, things I find in the street, things that my daughter gives me, things that my daughter makes, old pieces cut up, old clothes, old t-shirts, old pants. Things that have come from me are starting to work their way into the stuff. I don't have a specific agenda. I don't have a political agenda. I'm not looking to create a specific meaning other than trying to organize these marks and gestures and shapes in a way that's pleasing and suggests visual harmony. But at the same time, it's a little like awkward in a way, almost as if you're curating a dinner party and you have your parents, your best friends, a stranger, and your worst enemy, and you're trying to get them to all have a nice time together, and it ends up working out in some strange way. Maybe that's what my pictures are trying to do. Like these are playful, the mark is playful, and I'm moving. There's some gesture in there and some action, and I hope that they communicate a sense of honesty and impulse and truth, and I think those are all things that I try and work into myself as well. So on that front, yeah, they come from a personal place, but just trying to make something that feels good and has a sense of balance or a suggestion of balance. It felt good to make, and it feels good sharing it on a wall like this. This canvas that I'm using, which is actually a drop cloth from a hardware store, has a tooth to it. And I could gesso and get that tooth out, but I don't have that sort of time, nor am I interested in that sort of prep work. And the oil sticks and brushes I'm using, that's how the material sits on the surface. So that's the way the surface or the support is holding the mark. And it just doesn't have that hard edge that a piece of graphite on a smooth piece of paper has. And then, I'm using my body, my hands, my arms, and sort of smearing and other canvases flipped over as a tool, so it's more than the oil itself. There's other things that are moving the paint around, and I think that is leaving a different type of mark. The bigger piece is also, it's like I'm pointing out this dimension, like this is the top, this is the side, this is the bottom. And that's connected to like how my elbow's moving from my shoulder, my size relative to the size of the canvas. So yeah, like how I physically relate to the dimension I'm working, I think, translates as well. There's arrangement of pieces on these, whereas the canvases, they're a bit more direct in that sort of like limbo period where things aren't quite glued down yet, isn't in the canvases. But what is there is some cover-up, and I'm whitewashing entire works that feel not quite there yet. So there is a sense of history coming through. But while these canvases are in the process of drawing, the layers are drying so that I can edit over them, I'm working on the paper pieces on the floor or next to them. So inevitably there's an exchange between what's going on in the works on paper and the canvases. And I think you can see that in the marks. They have different power, but the gesture and touch, I think, translate both well. I have to practice restraint because of the nature of the material. I can't move pieces around collage style like I do in the works on paper. So trusting that these are okay where they're at is challenging for me. So I have to let them sit for a few weeks and flip them over and then look at them later and see if they still hold up. That's proves challenging in a work like this. In the works on paper, I'm starting to incorporate pieces that have representational imagery on them. With the example of that one is there's a butterfly decal. And similar way of like trusting that this piece is strong enough on its own is trusting that that little butterfly piece, that little moment, that spare little thing there is okay there, and living with it. It seems small, but like that feels like a big risk for me. And I just like the shape and the sort of blasts of color in that little decal. It sort of informs some of the other movements around it. So that little thing actually influenced a lot of the bigger things in that piece. So it's a balancing act because these look like they happen very quickly, but they take time. And they don't often, like I'm thinking about them and reworking them and cutting pieces out. They actually come together fast in the beginning, but then the process really slows down, which is I think where that touch and the suggestion of labor comes in with these. The different layers and the